Okay, hello everybody. Hello. Welcome back to the Antidote. It has been a minute since we've been here. I see people jumping on. Uh means a lot to be here tonight. My name is Ryan Virden. Let's start with the formalities. Ryan Virden, I'm the executive director and founder of Lyric Cultural Coaching. This show is the Antidote. This is where we come together and we talk about how do we find common ground? How do we address the absurdities we see in our world, the division, the polarization? How do we have honest conversations about the harm that's happened and repairing that harm? And so I can't think of a more important conversation to have tonight in the wake of the violence that's happening in Minneapolis. Certainly, that's where my heart and mind is. Y'all know I'm from Minneapolis. But also just around the world, and they're all connected, and we got a great show tonight planned to talk about those connections and how we come together. So super excited for it, giving some folks some time to jump on here. You can find us on YouTube, on Instagram. Doesn't matter where you are joining us, I will see your comments. So if you have a comment, you have a question, you can go ahead and drop it in the chat. Tonight we have a really great panel that's going to help make sense of all the things that we're talking about. And we can't start this discussion without first acknowledging the ICE murder of a unarmed civilian, legal observer, Renee Nicole Good. Peace to her, peace to the family. And the video, you know, we're watching the spin in real time, but people can see the video. I'm not going to show the video here. You see what happened. You see it for with your own two eyes, and so just can't imagine what her family's going through. Unfortunately, Minneapolis knows all too well the feelings of loss and helplessness and frustration and anger and righteous indignation. And so my thoughts and feelings are there with them and everybody suffering under this regime. Really important that we call out those lies, and that's a big part of our conversation today. The Antidote is back. Originally, this was going to be planned as a conversation about the 5-year anniversary of January 6th. And it's still going to talk about that. But obviously, this state sanctioned murder has put a different spin on it. And so I want to invite my panel here. We're going to come on. This is Shanene, Herbert, Crass, and Jeremiah Bay Ellis. Shanene is an organizer, circle keeper, and author based in North Minneapolis by way of New York. I've done enough work with her to know that she needs that New York in there. And she's rocking a really dope hat tonight. We have Jeremiah Bay Ellison. Recently has moved on from his post as the Minneapolis City Councilmember on one of the wards on the North Side. Longtime organizer, artist, North Sider. Jeremiah, thanks for being here. And then last but certainly not least, my man Crass, a fierce organizer, educator, all around just hard lover of humanity. All three of these wonderful human beings are hard lovers of humanity. And they are here to help us make sense of January 6th, the 5 years, what has happened since then, and also making sense of how it connects to what happened today. Again, if you have comments, you have questions, feel free to drop them. You can drop them right on YouTube, right on Instagram. I am here monitoring that, and my job is to shut the hell up so that these three brilliant people can talk. And so I'm gonna throw the first question out to y'all, and it's just to get us warmed up as people begin to join us here. The first question is thinking back 5 years ago now. 5 years ago, that's wild. Do you remember what you were doing when you first heard about the January 6th insurrection? And Shanene, I'm gonna ask you to start with that.
Absolutely. You know what? First of all, thank you for convening all of us and providing this space to talk about these issues. I'm in Minneapolis, and so today has been a day. And similar to January 6th, the heart is racing, right? The heart is with the people that are out on the street today, mourning the life of one of our community members. And so I'm glad this was not canceled, and that we can continue this conversation because it's along the same lines of what we continue to experience in this country. And so when you talk about January 6th, I remember like it was yesterday. I was working for an organization, a nonprofit organization, an international organization, doing healing justice work. And at that time, doing some significant work with young people and anti-racist organizing. And so I was at home, working from home and watching, like the rest of us around the country, from the internet, not only national news but local news. And just I remember feeling, right, at first it was apathy, right? I'm like, look at the white people cutting up. And that's just real. Me as a Black woman, I know uniquely that we would have never, Black people would have never been able to get that far into the Capitol to do those things. And so it was like, look at those white people behaving poorly. But also, as the hours pass and I begin to tap into the news and everything that people were saying around me, really feeling a shift to something heavier. There was some anger there, because then white people started to notice, like, conscious white folks were like, yeah, Black people would have never been able to do this. And to hear it from them was like, oh, so you do get it, right? And then just acknowledging the white privilege that was what we saw, to really protect the self-interest, right? The system is designed to do what it's supposed to do. And it was playing out in real time. And so having to move and really see those emotions shift in myself was really powerful. But also then, my restorative nature, really my heart was to the young people who then were coming from school and hearing these things online. They watch it just as much as we do, how they internalize it. What were their teachers thinking? Did they justify what was happening, or did they side with the people? And so all of those things kind of stirred in me in those moments, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jeremiah, what, you were on the city council when this was happening. I also you brought up something, Shanene, that I think is important for us to remember is similar to the murder of George Floyd. This took place at a time where we were all inside. And like we had access, we were on the internet. You could be working and watching it on the news, because you weren't necessarily at a place. And I think there's something about that particular context that's different now, right? Because people are going or coming and going from work. It feels like they might be they don't have the same type of access. So we're gonna come back to that later. But I think that's an important point that you stated there, Shanene. Jeremiah, you were working in government at the time.
Yeah.
You what was it? Where were you at? What were you doing? What do you remember about it?
If I'm remembering correctly, I think at that time, some city council members were able to get back into our offices, and that would have been, after the break. We would have been back in session. Probably first week of just taking on constituent services and all that kind of stuff. It was weird. I remember just specifically, going through emails, getting caught up as you do after the new year and all that stuff. And at first it was really silly. It was really mockable, right? You're seeing people, posture towards, this revolution and using this language of revolution, but their ends are not justified. Their ends are oppression. Their ends are harming other people. And I think there was something really just weird and maybe tragically humorous about it. And it felt like something that was really easy to mock. But similarly, as the day went on, and you start to see sort of the brutality of the crowd, you start to see some of the planning some of the threats that were made against Ilhan, against AOC, and you're like, wow, this really could spiral out of control. And we're sort of dealing with a level of mask off with somebody like Trump that maybe we haven't seen before. I don't necessarily buy into the narrative that Trump is somehow worse than what we got during the Bush-Cheney years from a policy level. But I do think that there's just this veneer of decorum that is striking when you see it disappear, even if you kind of know that it's phony at its face. And so Yeah, that's really what I remember, going through, was just trying to go about my normal work day, being perpetually online, and feeling like this was a really silly thing, and then slowly having it dawn on me, um, that people that I know could be seriously hurt, that this could spiral into something that we haven't quite seen before.
Yeah, I remember actually my first memories are clowning, honestly. Like, look at these people really thinking they're gonna get into the Capitol. Nobody's gotten into even during the Civil War, the Capitol wasn't breached. And it was a white folk temper tantrum. And then you realize how dangerous whiteness is and how dangerous white folk temper tantrums are. Right. And you started to hear the news reports of like, yo, they're really calling for Mike Pence to be murdered, like right there. They brought a gallows to do that. Like, they're not playing.
The thing that I think is so important about that whole equation, though, is it's not like they brought strategic planning and a lot of competence and brute force. It was kind of just the disbelief that authority had that this group of white people would be that violent that allowed them to be that violent. Whereas another group wouldn't have had that disbelief. Another group would have faced immediate suppression from authority.
Absolutely. To Shanene's point, right? Like, oh, black folks would never be able to, and have never been able to, right? Like, yeah, Chris, where were you at? What were you doing? You had been organizing for years before this, right? Like, so I imagine, I know we had talked maybe not as personally as we do now, but I know that you had been warning of like white resentment. You had been doing work in really, I would argue, radical work with white people around loving ourselves and healing. What do you remember about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was at home with my kids, and I've got, a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old. So, I mean, they would have been, 5 and 9 at the time. So they were like in the living room playing, hanging out. And I was watching, and I'd been working, I've been doing organizing, like you said, in white communities, for decades, coming out of the Rodney King uprising in Los Angeles. Okay, we need to organize white people in large numbers to join in multiracial movements for democracy. Because if we don't organize, and we meaning like anti-racist forces, organize white folks, then the racist forces, the far right forces, the authoritarian forces are going to organize the white people. And so I've been a part of that kind of organizing, and have been working on that in the election to get Biden elected in that election 2020, and knew that there was going to be massive resistance from Trump to allow that election to go forward. But I was watching the news like, okay, what is going to happen? And it was this terrifying I had this more of a terrifying feeling of, will the far right forces be emboldened and allowed to wreak havoc and violence and really try to upend this election? And so for me, it was just more of this, like, this terror of all these far right forces, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all these folks mobilizing a MAGA base to violently act. And so for me, it was the unfolding of that, and my kids were there, and I started trying to explain to them what was happening. And it was just this like profound sense of rage and grief. Because I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and so love to all of you in Minneapolis. So the Breonna Taylor uprising here going on at the same time as the George Floyd uprising all over the country, and seeing the brutal ways that police dealt with protests, the riot gear, the assault rifles, my kids being with me in the streets in Louisville protesting Breonna Taylor and George Floyd's murder, and my kids being terrified seeing the rows and rows and rows of riot gear cops ready to brutalize all of us, particularly the Black protest movement, but all of us. I mean, white anti-racists in Louisville being arrested and thrown to the ground during those protests. And so seeing the very different ways that a far-right fascist authoritarian force is marching on the Capitol and dealt with compared to pro-democracy, multiracial democracy, racial justice movements, it was enraging and terrifying.
Yeah, that sets up this next question that I want to talk about. All of us actually have experience in protests, like being on the front seat. I remember, Jeremiah, we were, a lot of people won't, and Shanene, you were there too, because we were all in Minneapolis at the time, around the 4th precinct and the murder of Jamar Clark, right? And I know, Jeremiah, you made national news with the picture with your hands up and the police officer with the chopper pointed at you, and so we all have had this experience that we're describing of not being able, of folks who are interested in justice, never having that type of access, never being able to be that unprepared or just sloppy, right? Like the idea that the FBI knew this was happening. That was another part of January 6th that I thought was really interesting. Is I remember waking up and being like, I wonder what they're really going to do. They were broadcasting like, yo, we're going to go and we're going to make sure that democracy does not function on this day. Everybody come meet us. And, juxtaposing that, Jeremiah, I think we weren't. Well, I had left you at the 4th precinct to go try to talk to Mayor Hodges to get MPD to stop shooting rubber bullets. And we kept that on the low. And by the time we got to Mayor Hodges' house, there were squad cars waiting for us. Right? And I'm like, we didn't even tell nobody that we were doing this. And we're intercepted. And so the idea, like, that's the pure hypocrisy and double standard. But at the same time, what it leads to what we're seeing today, right? Where now we got CNN literally on the streets of Minneapolis talking about, will this be another violent protest like George Floyd? And they're not even talking about the fact that January 6th, literally those people have been pardoned. They have a number of them have committed more crimes since being out. They have not come off any of their principles or like their stances about what the government should be and who it should serve. So I'm wondering, how do y'all see the lessons? And much of this is undergirded by Trump saying essentially like we are at war, and there's a lot of rhetoric about potentially a cold civil war, maybe not so cold of a civil war. And so I'm curious, where do y'all think? Are we currently in a civil war? What do you think when you hear people say that, when you hear folks, on the right, on Truth Social, truthing that out? I think that's what they call that, truthing on there, or going to Twitter. What do y'all think? And let's just go. I'm Shanene, jump in with that first, and then we'll check in.
Yeah, so I have lots of thoughts about this question, particularly like as you shared the questions with me. I want to say that we cannot pretend like we've never been here before, right? And we cannot pretend and keep on saying this line that, and I remember this specifically, news outlets were saying, this is not who we are. It is absolutely freaking who we are as a nation. We've seen this before in the quest for power. And we cannot forget the reason for January 6th actually happening. They denied, right, the democratic process. They were trying to anyways. And so we have been here before. We've seen this before. But I'm also really reluctant to compare it to a civil war, right? Because I think that's a dangerous false equivalency. And particularly, there was a quote that I shared on my social media that particular day. And it's, we march because we were getting killed, right? And y'all are rioting because you didn't get your way. And we are not the same. It's not the same. Black people have been demanding, right? The right to live, the right to vote, the right to exist without state violence. And then what happened on January 6th was really entitlement. It was white people's entitlement on center stage. It was about them refusing to accept the limits it was and those things are not the same and should not be placed on the same like moral ground. I have been to the Capitol before, a couple years even before January 6th. I had been to the Capitol with my children, right? And I know it's a fortress. We had to turn in our passports beforehand. We had to check in with our representatives from our district to even get access to the Capitol. And so we would have never made it past the first barrier. And so I think about even the woman who went to there was an instance where a Black woman went to the Capitol, and I think she did a wrong turn in front of the Capitol, and security shot her to death, right? And so, again, I don't want to compare this to a civil war because I know what that was about. And while it looks militarized, it looks like a breach of our rights, I don't think it's to that extent. And we really have to analyze whiteness and the extent to which we white folks will go to protect it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Shanene. Before I ask Jeremiah or Chris to jump in, that woman's name is Miriam Carey, was the woman who was shot and killed. Her daughter was in the car. Yep. Chris or Jeremiah, which one, if y'all want to respond or share your thoughts? Jeremiah is defaulting to you, deferring to you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think of a, I mean, it's this, I mean, I agree that it's not sort of like this clear, like, yes, this is this or that, but like, I think more about the period of Reconstruction and the backlash to Reconstruction, and thinking about the period after the Civil War of Reconstruction, of massive advancements for working class multiracial democracy. Massive advance. And so for white, I mean, white supremacy has always been about getting working class and poor white people to hate Black people, to hate Indigenous people, and to align with those who are exploiting and making them into soldiers for empire to serve the ruling class. And so for me, when I think about whiteness, it's always in service of a politics of exploitation, a politics of authoritarian violence, and getting white people to see themselves as having more in common and more of a shared interest with a ruling class agenda than with other working class and poor folks and the communities that actually want a functioning, healthy, democratic society. And so Reconstruction, so I live in Louisville, Kentucky. And so throughout the South during Reconstruction, the right to public education was advanced not only for formerly enslaved African people who freed themselves during the Civil War and rose up in a democratic revolution to advance freedoms for all of us after the Civil War. White working class people got the right to public education because of a multiracial democratic move driven by formerly enslaved African folks who were taking over in positive ways public power, asserting working class power, and creating democratic rights for all working class and poor people. And so I see what's going on now is very much in line with that revolt of a MAGA Trump-led revolt against democratic multiracial movements. And so I see more of the parallels in that. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan was during that period of fighting back against democratic advancements of the Reconstruction period. And so that violence being against multiracial democracy, against people coming together. The George Floyd uprising, there were more white folks in the streets for racial justice than arguably at any other point in history. MAGA and Trump absolutely do not want white folks joining in multiracial alliances and multiracial formations for democracy with Black and brown communities. And so January 6th is both a revolt against the electoral process, the democratic victory of the Democratic Party, but also against the multiracial forces that were advancing during the George Floyd uprising period, the feminist forces of the Me Too movement, all of these progressive democratic movements that were moving forward. And so that fight against a positive democratic movement of the Reconstruction period is more of where I see the similarities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jeremiah, I seen you over there. I know you got stuff to add.
Yeah. I mean, I think my co-panelists here are pretty spot on, and so I'll try to add something that doesn't just repeat what they've said, because I think they've had brilliant reflections on this. I think the language of a civil war is like something that the wrong people are probably like chomping at the bit to hear, because they probably just they think that they would relish something like that. And so that's my real sort of like hesitance to even like go there. But I do think that there is a real narrative battle that we're losing, quite frankly. I think that you look at the ways in which every aspect of our lives, including entertainment, including culture, and certainly communication, is just being monopolized by just a handful of people who all have a really similar ideology around around white supremacy for sure, but almost around dominance. Like, I think they use white supremacy as a convenient container, because that they know that they need poor whites to be their foot soldiers. But I don't actually think that they care about racial solidarity with poor whites. Like, I don't actually think white supremacy is their goal. Like, I think that white supremacy is their excuse to propagandize and deploy poor whites to enact the violence that will allow them to sort of live in their technocratic, utopia. They want to eliminate counterculture. They want it to just be so homogenized that there really can't even be interesting things about life, and everything comes down to just this sort of partisanship. And you're starting to see it happen, where everything just comes down to this partisanship, which side are you on kind of narrative. And so one side says that, to the shooting, the murder that happened today of Renee Nicole is justified, and then they know, even if they don't believe it, and they know that their followers don't believe it, they know that their narrative will be parroted endlessly. And so I do think that we have to do something about that, and I do think that we need to offer a real counter that isn't just sort of like a liberal version of nationalism that calls on a softer, approach. I think we really need to dig deep on what people's needs are and speak to them. Because I don't think that, and I'm using a royal we. I just got out of government, so it's like half my brain is there, half my brain is sort of as an artist, which is what I did before I was in government. But I think that there just needs to be a new sort of like cultural movement that can really counter this neo-fascist movement that we're seeing the right wing really succeed with.
Yeah,
Ryan,
that go ahead. Yep, Shanene.
If I can jump into, as Jeremiah was speaking, I was thinking about the poor white young men, right, and the rise of their power, and even like the danger of naming it a civil war. I think opens the door for those poor white folks to then also like make the comparisons that they were trying to make with Charlie Kirk, right? This attempt by like modern white ring folks to compare Charlie Kirk to Dr. King, right? And how insulting that felt. And so again, I wanted to throw that out there because that's also been sitting on my mind, right? These comparisons lead to other comparisons that are not okay and that are really absurd if you think about it. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, Alicia Smith is saying, she says, "Are we dangerously close to a civil war?" And I think one of the things that is really frustrating to me about this, so y'all I think everybody on here knows I teach justice and peace at a university, the intro. And much of the time I spend with students is getting them to identify what violence looks like. Right. And so because we're not very good at that, because we're not very good at understanding cultural violence, structural violence, and direct violence. We understand direct violence because that's what we can see and it's concrete. And I think when people say civil war, they're automatically going to that, right? Like you said, Jeremiah, I think there are some folks who think they would relish that, who think like, oh, it's cracking, a revolution, no matter what side, on both sides of the political spectrum, right? And I would be dishonest if I didn't say there wasn't a time in my political evolution where I was like, all right, like, let's do this. And then you realize how dangerous it really is, but also just how far apart we are. And in some ways, I don't disagree with anything that you all have said, but I guess maybe this is a bit of a pushback is we are so fundamentally polarized, right? Like we're literally, Kristi Noem got on TV tonight and called what happened an act of domestic terrorism. And she wasn't talking about ICE. She was talking about Renee Nicole Good trying to leave the scene, trying to follow directions. How do we make sense of that? How do we not understand that as an activist? That's my push, my follow-up.
You know, I don't want to be wet blanket or too cynical, but I think that I think the reasons that we imagine sometimes the Civil War happened or the ending of slavery happening is we sort of imagine it at a level of principle, right? Here was this barbaric institution. People were incensed by it. Those of us who are, really into the history, maybe find ourselves inspired by the actions of someone like John Brown. I know I certainly do, and the group that he led. But I also think that it's important to say that, folks like John Brown were a very small segment of people who opposed slavery at this principled level, at a moral level. And because that story tells a little bit better as you move into the future, I think that the reasons that John Brown, and I'm using him just as an example, I'm sure there's other examples, but the reasons that John Brown was moved to to engage in the fight that he engaged with, then becomes the reason that America was moved to engage in that fight. But then if you go back and you read letters that, and I was talking about this today in a class I was teaching, you go back and you read letters that Abraham Lincoln was writing to other other politicians at the time. You go back and read some of the speeches, and I don't have the quote right in front of me, but there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln that says, if I can preserve the Union by freeing no slave, I'll do that. If I can free all of them, I'll do that. If I can free some and keep some enslaved, I'll do that too. It was really more about, I see more that like Derek Bell's concept of interest conversion, where, I don't all the way agree with every aspect of it, and I'm probably going to oversimplify it here, but, this idea that power only advances racial justice when the interest of power converges with the interests of racial justice. So preserving the Union just so happened to converge with freeing the slaves. And so the slaves were freed for that reason. But if that interest had never converged, morality wouldn't have prevailed. And the national sort of like offense of slavery wasn't really enough to move people. And that's kind of my cynical take. All that to say, I don't know where the interest conversion would be. I don't know who the real oppositional party was, because it wasn't good enough, even though you had this long history of slave revolts, an incredible legacy of slave revolts that we don't talk about enough. But it wasn't that ended slavery. Ultimately, it was, a national power that had to step in and end it. And I don't see where, I don't see the Democrats, I guess, stepping in to fill that role.
Yeah, one, you can't bring up interest convergence without me saying I have a whole book about that, which says yes, it actually comes out tomorrow, and makes the argument that white folks need to understand it is in our best interest, materially, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, to end white supremacy, so that we develop that convergence. But as you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking, there's not a single Republican on the Minneapolis City Council. And it's not like, I mean, look at what happened after the uprisings, right? Like, there was all kinds of things that folks were like, that's not in line with morality. And is that even possible? So I appreciate that. Did anybody else want to jump in, Chris or Shanene?
Go for it.
I'm in agreement for sure. So I don't have nothing to add. Jeremiah, you said that.
Yeah. Well, so, and maybe I'm Chris. I want to go on a little bit of a sidebar with you. Not a sidebar, but like maybe it's appropriate for us to talk about how do we engage other white folks so that there is a critical mass of white folks who understand the real moral dilemma that we're in. That there is that this is racial justice is not a means to an end, right? That it is actually a worthwhile thing in and of itself, because it's good for us, because it's healing, because it creates actually the conditions that supposedly America aspires to, of equality and justice and, a land ruled by laws. Like, I would argue that we've always been at a civil war because the Declaration of Independence has never included everybody. The Constitution never applied to everybody. So we've never been in a situation where everybody enjoyed the benefits of citizenship, while also acknowledging, like that's not, people aren't actively taking up arms. And that's a whole nother level. So yeah, Chris, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so what happened today with Renee Nicole Good? I mean, and being called essentially a domestic terrorist or an active. I mean, it makes me think of like Viola Louisa, who was like a white woman, a Unitarian Universalist who joined in the civil rights movement, was in Alabama, was part of the Selma March, and in 1965 was murdered by the Klan. White woman. State, in the Klan, operating essentially in a state-sanctioned way. Her, James Reeb, another, white Unitarian Universalist minister who was also murdered during the time of the Selma March. They were described as outside agitators. They were described by the state and by the media as the ones who were bringing violence into the state. And so there's echoes of this, not just thinking about the Civil War and 100 plus years ago, but thinking about in the civil rights movement time period of the ways that the white folks, those who were murdered, even including the white folks who were anti-racist, being described as the ones that were creating the conditions of violence, that were bringing the violence. And so just like hearing those echoes. And so I guess for me, it's like thinking about, so white anti-racist Ann Braden, who was a legendary organizer here in Louisville, Kentucky in the 50s and 60s, who was essentially organizing working class white folks, but white folks of all backgrounds, to say that white folks have a shared interest in the Black freedom movement, and that white folks getting free from the nightmare of white supremacy is something that would help liberate all of our humanity. All of us have healthier society. All of us have more functioning schools, communities, parks, public resources, but more importantly, to actually end the violence that separates us in our own communities from our neighbors, from those who we should be in solidarity, in community, in friendship with. And so Ann Braden's idea then was that there's always this other America. There's the America of the enslavers. There's the America of the Klan. There's the America of MAGA. There's the America of the Democrats who advanced racist policy. But there's the other America of the freedom riders, of the abolitionists, of those who are fighting for a multiracial democratic society. So I think that tension between the different Americas has been a defining part throughout all of our history, like you were saying, Ryan, of from like the Declaration of Independence, who is human, who is described as having inherent rights, who has democratic rights, and that fight has always been a part of who we are and what this country is, and that we're in a real fight for what that future looks like and where what forces are going to be leading us. And so I think that pull of which America is a fundamental tension that we have to organize as many people as possible to be a part of the multiracial democratic America. And for me, organizing white people in the millions to see their shared positive future with multiracial democracy is key. And that's been, a part of the work I've been a part of, and that many of us have been a part of. Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, is a huge organization moving in that direction to organize white folks in the millions for multiracial democracy, not just from a place of being allies, but from a place of shared interest.
Yeah, that ally language is problematic, and we can talk about that. If you're joining us, welcome to the Antidote. Thank you. We're already 40 minutes in. Time flies when you're having fun and talking to brilliant people. My name is Ryan Virden. On the screen, you can see the wonderful Shanene Herbert, the amazing Jeremiah Bay Ellison, and the incomparable Crass. Look at them adjectives. I did that. We are talking about the legacy of January 6th, and obviously connecting that to the murder of Renee Nicole Good and the ratcheted up state authoritarian fascism that we're experiencing. We haven't even got into some of the broader implications, like kidnapping head of state of a sovereign country, for example. And so I want to go there with y'all. Thank y'all for joining us. If you like this conversation so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe, share, invite people. If you have questions, I see some folks in there. This is Anthony. I'm afraid that we will not hold the Democrats to task due to liberalism. So, Anthony, let's get into that, because where I wanted to go is this idea of accountability. I think a lot of people talk about that, particularly when they talk about January 6th. They talk about holding the rioters accountable. Trump obviously pardoned them, so they're saying there's a lack of accountability there. And I would argue that accountability requires relationship and care and shared, what we've been talking about, a shared understanding of morality, right? That there's a certain floor that we are not gonna crash through, right? Like these are the things. And so my next question is just, what has the impact been of the lack of accountability, the lack of relationship in this country since January 6th, in the 5 years since then? And I think I'm gonna toss this to Jeremiah, because I would love to hear it from even an electoral position, right? Like as a at the city council in Minneapolis, what was the impact of that?
Yeah, I mean, I could answer that in two ways. One is like the direct impact is you could argue is none, right? Because Minneapolis is a liberal city, and you talk to anybody, even the most sort of like center right Democrat, and they'll condemn what happened on January 6th. But you talk about accountability, and you talk about what it does to a population to see sort of like our social contracts be exposed as fraudulent. And I think that does do something to people. I think that it does make people feel as though, for some people, it totally demoralizes them. It makes them feel like, if they were warming up to the idea that there were rules that we all played by and agreed with, well, now that's been shattered. They're either disillusioned or re-disillusioned, and you're losing those folks. And often those are some of the most brilliant people who could be helping us fix our problems as a society. At the same time, you're emboldening others who feel like, okay, well, clearly this is the way that you get what you want, even if it comes with a little bit of a consequence. On one end, look at the reward you can reap on the back end. And I think that the kind of toxicity, vitriol, and anti-intellectualism, lack of thoughtfulness when it comes to engaging with the problems that we face. People just thinking that it's all about pressure, that it's all about ratcheting up the tension, that there is no due diligence to do, that there isn't a best practice. It's just about, can you leverage your power to get whoever to do what you want? And I think that has permeated down to the local level. I think that those kinds of attitudes have made it, have set the wrong example, so that people feel like they don't really have to, be knowledgeable when it comes to solving certain problems. I could probably riff on that for a long time, but I want to make sure that that others speak on this. But those are some of the things that I noticed. Just that slow erosion of the social contract at the federal level has inevitably had, I think, a really negative impact on how we relate to one another, both elected official to elected official, but also constituents to elected official.
Yeah. Shanene, you want to jump in, or Chris?
Yeah, so I'll bring it down to kind of personal, local, and immediate. For me, really, it's deepened. Well, it depends on the day. The impact really does depend on the day, and sometimes there isn't a disillusionment that happens with me personally, where I'm like, listen, I come from a long history of folks that we believe in Black self-sufficiency. And so it's nothing. For some days I'm thinking about, like, okay, how can Black folks build their island, because white folks gonna do what they gonna do. And power is gonna exist where power exists. And it's usually not to serve my community. And so there are those days. And then, my restorative brain and my restorative muscle kicks in, where it really deepens, one, my clarity on history, right? And the impact. Like my folks always say, like, there's nothing new under the sun. We've seen this before. We've been here before. And so that deepens my clarity, because now I see it for myself in this generation, because we think about history as so long ago, but then we see it repeated through instances like January 6th. It increases my urgency. And in that urgency, there's a need to, one, even learn. And once I learn it, share out the information with other folks. I'm glad Chris mentioned the anti-racist white organizers that have, that we've experienced in our lifetime and before, right? As ancestors, that have, continued the good fight. I like to tell people, listen, Democrats, anti-racist organizers, white folks that have been part of liberation struggles, they need marketing people. Y'all need to tell the people, posters, billboards, all of the things, because white folks, especially poor white folks, do not know. You ask them, like, who from your community were the liberators, right? Were the people that fought for the rights that we have today, and they literally do not know. They cannot recall not one name. They know the stereotypical MLK, right? But they don't know people in their own communities that have fought the good fight and that have lived experiences similar to theirs, that have been on the right side of history. And so getting marketing people is important. And so that really instills the urgency in me to, once I learn it, to share it out to people. And then really the impact of it is holding space. Like I told you, as I was watching it, I had visceral reactions, right, to this. And it's imperative, as these big moments happen in history, that we hold space for those people that feel a way about it, because they could either, take a turn to the left or to the right, literally and figuratively, where they side with people that stormed the Capitol, or they side with the right side of history. We all know, right? Accountability in this country is racialized. And so having more talks about what does accountability look like? What does healing look like? What does education and movement building and strategy look like? So people have really tangible things that they can work on and take a grasp to and implement in real time, right? And share with their children because the children are watching. And so that's what I'll add to that. It has real impact, right? Viscerally for me and for others in my community. And I want to minimize those reactions, because that's also a design of the system, has us frazzled where we can't think of a plan. And that is never good at all.
Absolutely. Chris, before I ask you to talk, I think I want to even hone in, because Shanene brought up a really important point that I was hoping we were going to be able to interject in, is that tonight, even, you've brought up a couple names, Ann Braden being one, that I think the majority of white folks, certainly the majority of white folks, but even the majority of white folks who are interested in racial justice and might even identify as anti-racist, probably don't know who that is. And I think that that's such an important part of what we're talking about here, right? Is like this idea of like, can we count on white people to do the right thing? I think is something that haunts me. And I think I would love to hear your thoughts specifically on that before some follow-ups.
Yeah, I mean, I am with you on we need a good marketing campaign for the history of white anti-racist organizing. Absolutely. And so I mean, there are some things that the way that I organize has been from like deeply thinking about how do we organize and move large numbers of white people. And so when I think about that, it's like white supremacy fundamentally hates a lot of white people. White supremacy hates all so many white people, like as was said before, of like, I don't know if like, you know, like ruling class folks that, you know, want the kind of techno utopian, if they really even care about, they absolutely don't care about all kinds of like poor, you know, white folks, working class white folks. And so for me, it's like the importance of the white anti-racist history is so crucial for the radical imagination for white people. I mean, for all of us, but in particular for white people to imagine a whole other way of being that aligns with a healthier society, a more democratic society, a more economically just society. And so thinking about the importance of people like Ann Braden, people, you know, Heather Heyer, who was a white woman who was killed in Charlottesville by the far right then. I mean, there are so many folks, and I want my white kids to know about people of color history throughout, you know, in leaders throughout history, but I also want them to know about white folks that look like them who were on the right side of history, who were with the other America for economic, racial, gender justice. And so I want white folks to be able to come alive in this work and see their future, the what's best for their kids, for their communities, to be with Black freedom movement, multiracial democracy, all of that. And it requires a real invigoration of this history of how white folks have been in significant numbers, sometimes way too small. But for me as an organizer, I'm like, if you got 10, that's better than 1. If you got 100, that's better than 20. And so we got to organize by the dozens to get to the hundreds, to then get to the hundreds of thousands. And at this point, Surge is the largest organization of white anti-racists in the history of this country, and it exists right now. There are organizers in white communities who are fighting tooth and nail to not have MAGA be we're the ones that speak for the white community. So for me, just in a final word here, I came out of the January 6th experience. I never want to know that January 6th is what white men think of as like, those were the people fighting for me. Because the right wing says that racial justice folks hate white men. Feminists hate white men in particular. You know, that the left hates white men. And so for me, trying to organize white men is to say the folks, Trump and MAGA and the January 6th insurrection, that was not about trying to defend white men. That was about protecting an authoritarian hierarchical society that does not love white boys and white men unless they can benefit those who have power. And so trying to organize white men and white boys to see that the progressive left is the forces that are fighting for them too.
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna do my little pushback because I think there's a lot of folks who might be watching this. And here we have a comment here, about you can't trust in white people because we don't see them doing the right thing. And Chris, me and you are aligned on this, and we've talked a lot about 60% still of white people, and even a higher percentage of white men voted for this administration. Right. And we see folks like Joe Rogan, and some of these other, in the manosphere, whatever you want to call them, broadcasters, whatever it is, who are now saying like, well, wait, this isn't what we voted for. And on one hand, I do want to engage those people, right? I want to say, okay, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. I want to talk about, I want to engage you because I need you to be a part of this multiracial democracy, feminist democracy that's interested in economic justice. But also, it's like, how did you not know? Right? Like, I get that too. I get this sentiment of like, we can't be trusted. And so I think that brings me to the next question of, in terms of the impact, what has it done to that ability to be in right relationship across a line of difference?
Can I?
Please, right. Yes, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I would love to jump in on this because I think that solidarity kind of you have to adopt it as a creed, right? Like some things have to be conditional, right? Like a lot of relationships have to be conditional. Even if you really love somebody, the relationship itself has to be predicated on conditions, or else that's how abuse happens, right? But internally, solidarity has to be a belief that people hold. And the one thing about the election, I want to say that, and this is a slight caveat that maybe doesn't matter, but it's not 60% of all white men voted for Trump. It's 60% of white men who voted at all voted for Trump. I'm interested in knowing
big facts.
Who are those people who don't vote? I know who they are in my community, and I know that they're some of the most intelligent, politically astute people, but they're disillusioned by the system. They don't think it can work for them. And so, like, who are those men in other communities? And what do they need to break them out of that cycle of disillusionment? And what kind of genius are we leaving on the table if we don't find a way to engage them? And who else? And it's not a neutral playing ground, right? Like other people are vying for their attention as well. And so I think that is just something that I try to keep in mind when it comes to, I'm somebody who, in my personal politic, I serve a Black community. I was raised in a Black community. But then as an elected official, I had to realize that North Minneapolis was more than just the Black community. But that didn't mean that I didn't come from where I come from, right? Solidarity has to be sort of a creed, and it's not the same as sort of like neoliberal multiculturalism. It's not simply about representation. It is about building relationships that can be long lasting, and that can still be conditional. There's nothing wrong with that. But that they can not be so transactional. I think that's what we need. And I think that there's a real case to be made there. And I think that there are a lot of brilliant people, white, Black, across the gender spectrum, that we leave on the table because we've allowed them to become disillusioned. And then we obsess with the people who are engaged, who might be oppositional, and we sort of forget about the people who are disengaged and disillusioned.
That feels really hopeful, actually, to me. Anybody want to jump in before I take it? I'm cognizant of time.
Ryan, say the question again.
I was just saying, what did this implication from like this throw the comment up there again about not trusting white people to do the right thing and the need to do that, and thinking particularly about what Chris had mentioned about wanting to bring in white folks and show them like the progressive left, these progressive policies are what's going to be good for you. They are healing. They are in line with your best interests. But then the reality of the amount of support that, quite frankly, white men continue to show to politicians and for policies that are harmful. And like, how is it possible? What did January 6th do to the possibility of being in right relationship across lines of difference? And what I heard Jeremiah say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you have solidarity as a ethic, you're going to be looking for those opportunities, no matter how few and far between. But also that we got to understand statistics a little bit more nuance, right? And that's not 60% of all white folks. That's 60% of white folks who voted. And I think the percentage is closer to 80% of white men who voted. And in Minneapolis, I will say this. For folks who are watching, I'm born and raised in Minneapolis. I currently live in outside Atlanta. And what you're saying, Jeremiah, rings so true to me. Where I'm out here, we were just up in Appalachia, and there were so many white people up there that were not political. Clearly not political. It was not what I was anticipating. It was not my experience in Georgia. Has been the exact opposite of what everybody told me that it was going to be, coming from progressive Minneapolis to a red state. And it has been anything but, quite frankly. And so I think there is a lot of hope actually in thinking about how do we engage folks that aren't previously engaged or don't think this is their arena. It doesn't matter to them. And I find hope in campaigns like Zoran Mandani's in New York, where it's like, hey, I'm going to actually go listen to what you need and shape my campaign to meet your material needs. And he had hope in people that they were able to come across difference to realize their mutual interest. Yeah. So yeah, anybody want to follow up on that? Last word, say anything? I went on a little bit of a tangent. Thanks, Shanene, for setting that up for me.
I was like, let me hear the question again.
and then you had to hear a lecture. Then you got me on my soapbox. I had to. Once again, if you're watching, please like and subscribe. You are watching The Antidote. I am Ryan Virden. That's Shanene, Herbert, Jeremiah Bay, Ellison, and Crass. You'll be able to follow them on social media. They're going to wrap up and tell a little bit about themselves in a second. But we got one more question, and it's the most important question we can ask on The Antidote. And that is, what do we do to come together in this moment, right? We haven't touched specifically, I think we implied, but you can't understand the attacks on DEI. You can't understand the foreign policies, the extrajudicial killings, all of that without understanding that January 6th and the lack of accountability, the lack of things that are informing those things, right? They've emboldened these type of actions. But the most important thing we can ask is, what do we do about it then? Right? I think there's lots of people, particularly tonight, who are leaving the vigil for Renee Nicole Good and thinking, what can I do? Right? They're on social media. They're looking for, a post to reshare or a comment thread or somebody to argue with even, right? Or, my mom was talking about, she texted her sister and was like, is this what you know what I mean? All that, like, what do we do? And I will open up. Would love to hear from all of you, and who would like to go first.
I'm happy.
So in my restorative practice work, a lot of what we do, Ryan, together and separately in our professional work is have conversations, right? Deep conversations to better understand, one, what people value, right? What is their previous experiences and what are their hopes and dreams for the future? And I think that those conversations oftentimes shine a mirror on like how we're very similar to each other. That question about we've never seen white men be really in solidarity. And so I don't want to rush to saying that we just have to be unified. We have to be in solidarity or even allyship for that matter. Really, at the very minimum, understand each other's experience. Also understand history. If we can just be honest about that and not minimize those things, I think that puts us closer together to this thing. What we're rushing to is unity. Truth telling and accountability is going to be is imperative, right? understanding that what happened in January 6th could never have happened to Black folks. And then what, right? And then what are you going to do about it? How are we going to change this? And so if we can be just truthful, let's start there. And then really talking to each other to manage this crisis and for true like transformation to really happen.
It's always amazing how to me it's always so easy. Like tell the truth is always the first step. Just tell the truth. Chris or Jeremiah?
Just to piggyback on the history piece, because I think that's spot on. I think that fascism, other types of repression and oppressive regimes, they need to diminish the arts, because the arts are how we understand each other. It's how we develop, empathy and emotional bonds with each other, and relate to one another. And they need to diminish the importance of history. And those are the things that they do. And I think that we can, if you're looking for instruction, like a how-to, some of the best examples you can get are through history. I was reflecting on your comment about, kind of the, Appalachia region in the South, and it got me thinking about Miles Horton, and the work that he did as a white rural Tennessee guy, to train people who became some of the most important people in the civil rights organizers in the civil rights movement. And that kind of breaks, people don't know that history. It kind of breaks their brain to realize that there was a, white Appalachian academic in the 50s who cared about this, who cared about Black issues, who cared about Indigenous issues. If you don't know that history, then of course you can't be instructed by it. You can't learn a lesson from it. You can't duplicate and pull some of its learnings into the present. And so I think that it's really important that people know their history, not in a passive way where you can just kind of like know it and now you can maybe go win, Scrabble or whatever sort of like, I'm forgetting the name.
It could be on Final Jeopardy.
Yeah, exactly. You go win Jeopardy, but know it because there's instruction in it. Know it because you can read up on Miles Horton or anybody and say, okay, they did that, so maybe I'm going to do that. Okay, that works in 2026. That doesn't, but maybe this new thing does. The best instructions you can get are going to be pulled right out of history, and especially the history that's been hidden from you.
The history teacher in me is like singing right now, Jeremiah.
Absolutely. My heart is happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Fascism, authoritarianism, white supremacy are deeply committed to intellectual and spiritual impoverishment and malnourishment. And so there are so many white folks that have been spiritually and intellectually and culturally malnourished by this system. And so for me, I want to bring anti-racist nourishment into white communities. And so with white men in particular, just to keep building off what you said, I want white boys and I want all of us to know about folks like, Thaddeus Stevens of the Radical Republicans, William Lloyd Garrison of the Abolitionists, Carl Braden, who worked alongside Ann Braden, Miles Horton, Harvey Milk. The people all around us to know, because I think who defines and who is representative of a people is crucial. So like that comment before of like, I don't trust white people. And I don't know who you are or where you're coming from, but for me, it's less about do I trust people and how do I organize people? And how do I bring nourishment and liberation knowledge and liberation culture into communities that I want to organize? So it's less for me of like, who do I trust? And who, if I'm not organizing those folks, who's gonna organize those folks? And if I have not been organizing in white communities, I sure as fuck know who's gonna organize in those white communities. And I do not want them to have my white kids. I do not want them to have my white neighbors. And so I'm gonna fight for white people to be saved from this death culture so that we can actually build in positive ways. And so again, that with that question, even the destruction of our intellectual memory is unreal. So that in that question, it was like Jewish people in the US as an example of not trusting. The Jewish left has been at the forefront of advancing democracy in this country, from working class organizing of Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman in the 1800s up through the civil rights movement. And so if the Jewish community gets represented by far right forces, as opposed to remembering that the Red Scare, the Palmer raids, the McCarthy era, the assaults on the Jewish left, state violence, destruction of working class organizations led by Jewish folks has been a part of this history. If we don't know all of that, then suddenly we start abandoning whole communities as unorganizable. And I don't want any community in this country to be seen as unorganizable, because I want fucking everyone.
Amen. We want fucking everyone.
Listen,
fucking everyone.
You know, when we're in circle, people are like, my racist grandma, you know, I can't go to Christmas because my auntie is racist. It's like, no, you need to go to Christmas. You need to go to all the things with your racist auntie so you can get them and gather them together.
You must be reading my Instagram right now, because I'm getting dragged all over for being like, hey, yeah, it's cool that you canceled all these people, and now who's gonna go get them? Like, how do they change?
Listen,
right? Like, especially as white people, like, oh, go ahead.
History has told us, Ryan, that they are not learning it from Black people. If they were, they would have learned it a long time ago, right? I cannot step in white spaces and say, listen, despite your self-interest, I need you to be interested about Black issues. They have to feel that their self-interests are being met. And only you all can do that. So I applaud you for that work. And I urge white folks that are listening to continue and to lean into those racist aunties and uncles and grandmas. Don't abandon them.
Right.
That's what I mean. We hope that they're going to die off soon, but the reality is that they're wreaking havoc on communities.
Totally. And just to add on to that, and I think this happens a lot, is that the racist folks in the family start to represent the whole family. And then the anti-racist folks leave the family. And then there's a lot of people in the family, similar to what Jeremiah was saying, of like those who didn't vote or those who are disillusioned. There's a lot of folks on the sidelines that are not then being interacted with or touched, because the anti-racist folks are abandoning communities, abandoning families, not wanting to deal with the racists. But then there might be a dozen or so other family members that are being left unorganized by you not being there. So if I don't want the racists to come and define this is the entire community, because there's a lot of folks in the community that just aren't being touched and brought into the left who could be.
And there's a lot of fear amongst those people then too about being in. There's just so much about the way that we are operating in where we're not in relationship with each other in a vacuum, right? So it's like, oh, do I stay in relationship with my uncle, or am I going to be seen as racist because I know he said these problematic things, and so now in order to be the good white person, I'm tapping out, and I'm going to post it on social media that I tapped out, and I'm going to tell everybody that, you know, you gotta unfriend me if X, Y, and Z. And now here we are in one of the most polarized situations where the reality is the interests of a very, very, very fucking few are being served, right? And it is wild how this administration is playing in people's face, telling you that, oh yeah, we got you, as your healthcare is about to go up, as you can't afford food. You know, literally this man's talking about the economy is doing good as people are broke as a joke. Like, they're literally playing in our face, acting like we're dumb. And when I say we, I mean white people, because most of the people of color I've been on that shit, have been able to say like, hey, they're lying. Like, they ain't. I might not be politically engaged, but I know they're lying, and that's why I tapped out. So yeah, I really appreciate the engage your people, have the conversations. You don't gotta like everybody, but you can't disengage. Not if you care about us as a community. We're all in community together, and solidarity. Jeremiah, thank you for saying it. Has to be an ethic. Nobody's disposable. So we talk about that all the time, Shanene. Nobody's disposable, right? And we got to hold people in that. And so let's let that be the last word. How do folks connect with y'all? Shanene, Chris, Jeremiah, how can they support you? Shanene, this is your chance to talk about your book. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Thank you. So I wrote a book last year called Soul Yearning. It's a professional Black woman's guided journal for healing and restoration. It allows Black women to talk about and reflect on microaggressions, our connections to our mothers, our connection to womanhood, our connection to this world and our children. And it's told through my story, but it allows the reader to kind of reflect their story. I have used this book as a vehicle to work with organizations, school systems, government organizations to really hold space for those women that really are in these spaces, and they come with their lived experience as they're working. And so that work is truly fulfilling. I've also done some work with Ryan. And so if you're interested in having deep and engaging conversations about what race is, what it looks like, how it shows up in daily interactions, and how we can grow closer, right, in connection to one another, you can reach out to me through email, sherbert55403@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm on social media. And I'm just looking forward to 2026 and doing more. I designed Ryan's book cover.
Sure did.
And I'm super excited and proud of that. So I dabble in some arts as well. And so, yeah, I'm out here.
Thanks for that. Chris, how people get a hold of you? How can they support you?
Yeah, you can get social media, Facebook, Instagram, Chris Crass, or chriscrass.org is my website. But I would just really encourage folks that are, feeling any kind of wanting to get connected. I'm a dues paying member of Surge, showing up for racial justice. Join Surge, become a dues paying member, get active in whatever way you can. I'm also a dues paying member of Democratic Socialists of America, trying to elect good people like, Mom Donnie and all over the country, become dues paying members, participants in social justice organizations. Your time, your talent, and also your money are crucial. So joining up into progressive organizing, and let's get in this movement and keep building together.
And man, Jeremiah, how people get in touch with you? Oh, I think Jeremiah's phone died. His connection just lost. All right, well, we'll put Jeremiah's social media in the description below. I'll put both of y'all's, Chris and Shanene. Thank y'all so much for being here. Any last minute questions coming in? I don't see any. Oh, we got some any good book recommendations? We'll put those in there too. Yeah, Shanene,
Ryan,
Chris.
What I tell people. You know what I tell people about book recommendations. I can give it to you, right? Because all of us are probably well read and have robust library collections. But I think one of the things that I urge people to do is be out in community. That's how you really learn people, and not in an exploitative way or extractive way, but be out in community and really talk to your neighbors. That's the best way.
100%. There ain't no secret to it. There's no theory. There's nothing you're going to read that all of a sudden you're going to be in the right relationship. You got to go be yourself, be authentic, and show up in relationship with people. Live your lives together. That's the best thing we can do. That's the best antidote. On that note, thank y'all for being here. Like, follow, subscribe, and peace and love, solidarity all the way around. Shanene, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you. Peace.